welcome back to ADREF, the End Youth Homelessness Cymru podcast. I'm your host, Beth Gallivan, the Youth Voice and Engagement Coordinator at EYHC.
I am Bill Rowlands, the head of End Youth Homelessness Cymru.
And today we are talking about rural homelessness. Unlike the previous podcast episodes that we've done, this isn't an issue that EYHC has done our own specific research into, but we felt that it was an important element of youth homelessness that we wanted to highlight on the podcast.
Yeah, definitely, Beth. I feel like there's certainly a research gap there when we look at rural homelessness as a specific phenomenon in and of itself. And I think just like how conversations about homelessness generally tend to focus on rough sleeping over other forms of homelessness, I feel like conversations on homelessness are very much based on the thinking that it's an issue found solely in urban areas, but we know obviously that in Wales and in countries all over the world, this certainly isn't the case. Over the past year, in 2023-24, over 1,300 16 to 24-year-olds presented to their local authority as being threatened with or experiencing homelessness in the local authority areas of Wales considered to be rural. So there's certainly a big research gap there at an academic level, but I also think just more at a society level, there's certainly a lack of an appreciation of the issue, a lack of an appreciation of how it manifests itself differently in urban compared to rural areas, and just a big lack of understanding of the issue at large.
Yeah, 100%. And like everything with youth homelessness, it is multifaceted. There are a lot of social, cultural, political issues that contribute to it, like second homes, transport, and the local economy. So we're going to be unpacking all of those on today's episode with our guests, Sian Elen Tomos, who is the Chief Executive Officer at GISDA, a charity in Gwynedd that supports young people experiencing homelessness. We've got Chris Davis, the Youth Homelessness Coordinator from Powys, and a young person called Jess, who lives in Gwynedd and has unfortunately experienced rural homelessness. So with all of their respective expertise, we got into a really interesting conversation that unpacked some of those issues. And I think it's fair to say that Bill and I also learned a lot from this chat as well. Hopefully you will, and enjoy the episode. Croeso, welcome to another episode of the End Youth Homelessness Cymru podcast. Today we are talking about aspects of youth homelessness that's sadly quite common in Wales, but isn't talked about very often, and that is rural homelessness. So we're joined today by Chris Davis, who is the Youth Homeless Coordinator for Powys. This is the role that was created in every local authority at the same time as the End Youth Homelessness Coalition was founded. So Chris, thank you so much for being here. And could you just tell us a few words about your role and what it entails?
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for the opportunity, Beth. The youth homeless area of my role, Youth Homelessness Coordinator, I've been doing it for about 2 years now since my colleague Kirsty left. And the role is quite simply having a youth service set of eyes on young people who are at home, who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless. The other part of my job is around youth engagement aggression framework, and the Welsh Government put the two together year before last, around recognising that people aren't going to be getting into education, employment or training if they're homeless. So those two things go really importantly together. And my role is basically I work with a team of staff who work with young people, roughly 250 to 300 young people across Powys each year. And our role is identifying those at risk or who are homeless and working closely as part of a multi-agency team in terms of finding solutions and making things as best as we can for those young people. I'd like to say that prevention is the most of our work, but unfortunately, we deal with a lot of crisis. So having the balance between the two, hopefully if we're getting it right, we'll see more prevention and less crisis, but the crisis keep on coming because of other things which are out of our control, really. I forgot to mention, we work with young people aged 16 to 25 years of age, and 25 years of age means they stop working with us when they become 26. So we've got a really good length of time to work with a young person over what are sometimes monumentally complex needs and experiences that they need to work through. So hopefully that gives you a picture of where we're at.
We're also joined by Sian Elen Tomos, who is the Chief Executive Officer at GISDA, which is a charity in Gwynedd that supports young people who are facing homelessness. Sian, diolch yn fawr am fod yma heddiw. Thank you for joining us. And same question, would you mind just telling us what your role is in a few words and a little bit about GISDA as well?
Oh, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's lovely to be here with you all. I'm the Chief Executive of GISDA, a charity supporting homeless young people and vulnerable young people, predominantly in Gwynedd, but we also work on Anglesey with some projects as well. We've got about 10, 12 projects. We've developed a model called Model V, which is basically based on psychologically informed approach and trauma-informed approach to ensure that we co-produce our services and projects with young people and that everything is tailored around every individual. So our services include providing support and accommodation, education, mental health, creative work, travelling abroad. We've got a wide array. I'm sure I'll get more opportunity later on, so I won't go through everything now. But yeah, we've got quite a few projects.
And we're also joined by Jessica, who is a young person in Blaenau Ffestiniog who is supported by GISDA. Jessica, thank you for being here. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Right, hi. Thank you very much for having me as well. Yeah, I'm living in Blaenau Ffestiniog and I'm receiving support and accommodation from GISDA and have been for about around over a year now. And it's helped a lot in many aspects of my life, actually.
Before we get into rural homelessness, I just wanted to ask you, Sian, quickly about the importance of the Welsh language as part of GISDA and what you do. Pam wyt ti'n meddwl bod e'n bwysig bod gwasanaethau GISDA yn cael ei ddarparu trwy'r Cymraeg? Why do you think it's important that GISDA services are delivered through the Welsh language?
So, we're a charity based in Gwynedd and we're quite lucky really that a lot of people in Gwynedd naturally convey in Welsh. So it's vitally important that we are able to provide a bilingual service to young people. So if a young person requires our service and who wishes to be supported through their first language Welsh, then, it's important that we're able to do that. So all of our staff are able to, so it's obviously the young person's choice, but we've got that provision, all our staff are bilingual. But I appreciate that we're quite lucky really that we are able to do that in Gwynedd, but also it's something that we as a charity feel really passionate about anyway, and we're putting a lot of effort into ensuring that we are able to support staff to, improve their skills, that we're able to support young people as well if they want to develop their linguistic skills. So yeah, it's something we feel really passionate about, so it's not an issue really.
And Sian, am I right in thinking you've won awards for the work?
Yeah, in the Youth Awards, they were held in January 2024 for our Welsh language provision in the Youth Awards. So, that was a privilege, and felt that it's an honour really because, there are many other services and many other charities and companies and the local authorities and so forth that equally deserves that award. But, so we are really proud and chuffed with that award. So, yeah.
As you should be, yeah. Congratulations. Today we're talking about rural homelessness, and I think we find at EYHC that in general there's quite a lot of public misconceptions about homelessness. But how do you think that rural homelessness manifests itself differently to other forms of homelessness, and do you think that the public perception of homelessness can be misleading about how people experience homelessness in rural areas?
I think the issue of youth homelessness and homelessness in general is a perception that many people link with cities because it's a visible issue when people go to cities, and yet it isn't a visible issue when people see, quaint rural towns. And homelessness equates to, unfortunately, due to media perceptions quite often delivered, is people sleeping on the streets. Whereas across Powys, you don't see much of that. Yet there are lots and lots of people who are homeless. So it's kind of hidden. And people being in, sofa surfing culture, whereby they don't have their own place, but they spend time with various friends or families on sofas, a massive issue for us. And it's hidden because you've got pockets of communities where there may be issues, but you don't necessarily see it because they're not on the main road passing through that village or town. We've also got an interesting issue with Powys in particular, is that we border Herefordshire and Shropshire as the two English counties, and we share borders with Wrexham, Denbighshire, Gwynedd, Ceredigion, Carmarthenshire, Neath Talbot, Rhondda Cynon Taf, Merthyr Tydfil, Caerphilly, Blaenau Ffestiniog, and Monmouthshire. We doubt if there's many local authorities in Britain, let alone Wales, with as many borders as us. We did a piece of work recently, and just at school level, there were 1,160 young people accessing our school services from outside our borders. So if you can imagine that number of people to and fro across the borders, and that's a relatively small age group, how many potential people are there crossing borders to access services and to fulfill whatever's needed in those areas? So it's hidden because quite often those people may not come from and reside in Powys. They may arrive in Powys, so they're not seen. The other thing that we get a massive issue with rural homelessness is access to services, and access to services whereby, unless you've got a car, you are totally isolated. And that's access to anything that's needed depending on where you live. So that could be, for example, we had a young person who was stranded in a hospital recently, and she couldn't get home. That was 60 miles that she had to find her own way, or was left to find her own way, without having any money in her pocket to get that route, with no help available. So little issues like that. She was 999 to hospital and left there. So isolation there. And then any other service that you want is a massive issue. And going back to Powys, we haven't got an A&E in the county. So for a young person to access A&E, that needs to be out of county. And to put it into context as well, Powys is a quarter of Wales geographically. So a quarter of the country is made up by one county, which doesn't have an A&E. So hopefully that paints a picture of how sparse sometimes those services can be, and what a challenge it is to actually get to somewhere to access a service. And a colleague who's involved with drug services did a piece of work for one person to get to one appointment was a 4-hour round trip. If they missed the bus, that would equate to a 7 or an 8-hour round trip to access a half-hour session. So for somebody in need of medical support and attention, has got that challenge to access the service before they even arrive. Those are the sorts of challenges, hopefully, which demonstrate. And like I say, because it's not seen, doesn't mean it's not there. And there are many people in very difficult circumstances which are kind of forgotten because it's not the stereotypical view of people in tents, although we have those, people in doorways, although we do have some of those, but nowhere in comparison to the built-up cities where you can walk down to Mary Street in Cardiff and see the problem there, really, So hope that answers the question, Beth.
No, it does. That was great. Thank you, Chris. Sian, how about you? What are your experiences of public perceptions of homelessness versus the sort of reality that you see in Gwynedd?
I think Gwynedd and Powys are quite similar in a lot of ways, but I appreciate that Powys is much larger than Gwynedd as well. I always say, it takes 70 miles to get from north of Gwynedd to the south of the county, and you're still within the same local authority area, but I appreciate for Powys it's even it's further than 70 miles. So I suppose it's the same issues, but my main concern is my concern is that it's expensive. It costs more money for young people, but also as an organisation. So from a young person's point of view, I'm sure Jess will come in on this later on, but, living in somewhere like Blaenau Ffestiniog, if you haven't got a car and you rely on public transport, it's really difficult to access services. For example, food. There aren't any large supermarkets in Blaenau Ffestiniog, so the smaller shops are, they cost more than the larger supermarkets. But, I agree, the public transport as well is a massive issue in Gwynedd. We haven't got much trains, and, the bus service are quite scarce, and it's hard to get from one point to another. It's hard enough for staff to travel to see and support young people, but obviously it's even more difficult for young people wanting to access everything they need. Quite often what we get is people wanting to support young people. Perhaps an employer want to offer a job, or maybe a landlord want to offer a house. But for a young person, you need a lot of things around that young person to enable them to ensure positive outcomes and to move on to independent living successfully. You need the affordable accommodation within distance to wherever they find work, and that there's adequate bus service, and that they're close to friends and family. And so anyway, ticking all the boxes is really hard. But it's challenging working in a rural area, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, what about you as someone that's got that kind of first-hand experience of experiencing homelessness in somewhere like Gwynedd? What is that like versus what you imagine it might be like in Cardiff, for example?
Right, well, as Sian and Chris have both mentioned, accessing things can be quite difficult from around here. Sian's mentioned there's no supermarkets here, and the shops that are here can be quite costly. So if you want to go anywhere to do any proper grocery shopping, you've got to travel. And as she's mentioned, public transport can be lacking in this area quite a bit, and both buses and trains. And it can also add up quite a bit as well, especially trains. So it can be difficult to get around and to get what you need. And I think in this area as well, for young people my age, a lot of them are trying to learn to drive maybe. And even trying to take a driving test in this area is insane for waiting times. So transportation in this area is quite difficult, especially at night, because a lot of buses don't run till that late in the night. So you need to be very careful when traveling in the evening to be able to make sure that you can actually get home, and there'll be massive waiting times in between buses maybe. So it can be a bit challenging around here.
Yeah, of course. Chris?
Yeah, I was just going to add, Beth, the system around actually if somebody presents as homeless, then somebody gets placed in what's available. And because there's such shortages in availability, it would be, and I've experienced a young person being taken from Newtown and being housed in the Swansea Valley under emergency accommodation, which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours drive away. It's not far off driving to London in some cases, time-wise, But not only the distance, the actual challenges of picking a young person up who normally doesn't have that many life skills and is not that confident and has got a whole range of possible challenges, which ended up being homeless. We're then taking them from a community, an area that they know, and putting them somewhere where they don't know and saying, get on with it. And that is so, so difficult for anybody. I think any of us would struggle with that sort of concept of you just being picked up and said, okay, this is where you're living for the next couple of days. Not knowing an area, having limited resources, not having any community to call on. If you've got any family or friends, well, they are another hour and a half, 2 hours drive north is massive. And that comes down to a stock issue and to availability of accommodation issue. And just to add as well that you've got most houses are built as minimum 2-bedroom. Single bed occupancies generally aren't built because they're not good investments for builders. So as a result, even people that we put in places then suffer the bedroom tax issue, which means they can't afford the places that are available anyway. So the odds are significantly stacked against young people succeeding without help.
That's a really important point, actually, and it kind of brings me to my next question, which is about housing supply. And that's an issue across Wales, whether you're in the capital city or whether you're in a small village. The shortage of housing is a problem everywhere in Wales. But when it comes to rural areas, I think perhaps that problem it presents itself slightly differently, and the causes are slightly different, maybe. I've got some data here. Affordability, typical house prices are more expensive relative to median local earnings in most of rural Wales than the rest of Wales. Even in Carmarthenshire, where that gap is narrowest, the typical prices for the lowest cost houses are still more than 5 times the annual earnings of the lowest paid workers, which effectively puts property ownership out of reach and pushes people into the private renter sector, which is quite limited and getting smaller because a lot of the properties are being converted to holiday lets and second homes. So in your experience, how does that issue drive youth homelessness in your localities?
Well, yeah, there's a lack of new social housing being built over the past 20, 30 years compared to how many houses were being built in, say, the 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s. There was a hell of a slowdown then in the 70s, 80s and 90s. So now we're playing catch up, and unfortunately whoever's in part of the systems now is bearing the brunt of that. But the Welsh Government have given themselves a target to build minimum of 20,000 low carbon houses before the end of their term in 2026, which obviously we welcome. And in particular, the low carbon, because it's so expensive to pay for fuel. That's just as hard as finding a house in the first place, finding an affordable accommodation. And like Chris said, 1 bedroom is just even harder. We need more houses where young people can afford. There aren't enough in this area. Traditionally, they're mostly, the old council houses type 3 bedroom and 2 bedroom, whereas, in cities you did get new 1 bedroom flats being built in the 80s and 90s, but not as much in rural areas. So it's hard. But, I always say to commissioners, you need more than bricks and mortar. You need that bricks and mortar to be in the right place, and you need young people to be able to access support timely and in the right place. So support needs to go hand in hand when it comes to young people.
Absolutely. Jess, I'd like to ask you about that as well, about how you find living in supported accommodation with GISDA versus maybe some other experiences that you've had in Blaenau.
Right, so I've been living in the supported accommodation. I've got a flat at the edge of town, and it's been really nice actually. Just having a roof over my head, and it's a nice space as well. It's actually quite a nice sized flat, especially for just me, one person. So I've got a nice space, a nice area. I think in Blaenau especially, there's a lot of houses that are quite damaged, very old houses. There's a lot of old houses in Blaenau and a lot of damage from the wet, so lots of mould and stuff. So I think that could also contribute to housing issues. This area can be quite prone to damage and mould. I know a lot of people who own their houses have to constantly treat things or have to renovate. So thankfully I'm in a place that's nice, so I don't have to worry about that. But I imagine that would make things a lot more difficult for young people, because even if they were able to get a home, they'd have to constantly be looking at trying to fix it up and make sure that it can stay a safe enough environment for them to live in.
Yeah, of course. Chris, how about you? What do you think are the main challenges around housing supply in Powys?
I think many of the places in Powys are seen as high-end in terms of expensive. So that's an issue because private landlords follow the market and then are priced out of young people's budgets. So I think that's an issue in many cases. We're fortunate in that we've got really good relations with many of our housing association colleagues. So we work closely in finding solutions, and I know our authority works with housing associations in terms of new builds, etc. I've got an issue with the idea that we give young people single bedroom places and say get on with it as well. And what I mean by that is, if you've been brought up in a family, at what transition do you step straight into saying, well, I can live on my own now. I can budget, I can cook, I can clean, I can do all the things that are needed, answer mail, pay my bills, sort it out, and the list goes on and on and on. So there's a massive need there. And for me, I think people live better together. And I think that's something that in some areas is being explored, but I'm not too sure about. Certainly in Powys, it isn't offered that much in terms of communal living and where the opportunities are around that, and recognising young people who may have issues with some of those issues that I've said in terms of coping, and supported living opportunities in order to bring them to a point where they are able to live on their own. And single occupancy, lots of our young people are lonely. And I think that's become an even bigger issue since COVID, where everybody said, stay indoors, don't mix with anybody, don't speak to anybody. And lots of people have kind of grown up with that issue, which is a massive barrier for them in terms of getting over it, really. So there's a whole range of issues there. But stock is definitely a key. And going back to my previous point, where they want, because a young person should be able to choose where they live. I remember years ago, an old colleague of mine in Carmarthenshire had to move out of her village because anything that went for sale in the village was bought by somebody from not local to the village, and there was exceptionally high prices. So the issue of young people being priced out of the area is also an issue, which is something, partly being addressed with some of the policies in North Wales at the moment, and I think Pembrokeshire to a degree. But pricing people out and single occupancy and just expecting people to manage is a massive issue, I think. And hopefully building projects where that support's given, and support such as what my team does in Powys allows for young people to grow in the time that they need to grow, as opposed to being forced to live on their own at a young age, which for so many doesn't suit that well.
Can I just add on what Chris was saying, because it's very interesting to listen to Chris and to Jess as well. Thank you, Jess. I think, whereas in Gwynedd, yes, we do have a great relationship with the local authority and with Welsh Government and the housing associations, but I think there is a missing link here where our experience as a sector supporting young people, just listening to Chris there, we know what young people needs. And I think when it comes to developing policies such as, let's build 20,000 houses, let's give the money to housing associations to build houses, we're not really part of that conversation to influence them to design those houses in the right places and ensure that there is a link between the bricks and mortar and pots such as the homeless prevention pots and the housing support grants, to ensure that perhaps the target should have been, that 10% of that 20,000 should be allocated for people who need support, and ensure that there is adequate housing support funding to go alongside that, because I think in the long term it would save a lot of money to the public purse.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Sian, and it's definitely something that EYHC has asked for back in our roadmap in 2021. We were saying that young people's voices should be an integral part of the local market housing assessments. Young people's voices should be feeding directly into that, because as everyone on the call so far has alluded to, the 20,000 target is great if it's achieved, but it's not necessarily responding to issues that are more relevant at that more granular local level in Gwynedd and Powys.
And I think, like Chris said, it's fantastic to see the change in policies in, especially Gwynedd with regard to the second home, where they've increased the tax on second home owners. I think that's a positive step, but we need to ensure that any income revenue raised from that is reinvested to ensure that we can provide more houses for young people mainly. It's still early days, I think. It'd be good to see a review of that policy in a couple of years.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that in terms of the Welsh Government's position on youth homelessness and the stats which say that most people who are homeless first experienced homelessness as a child or young person, then in order for us to prevent homelessness, we've got to prevent youth homelessness and effectively turn those taps off. And we're not going to do it unless we've got effective places for young people to live in, whereby they break that cycle of being homeless and have the skills and availability of resources such as employment, such as transportation. I think Jess mentioned earlier, is so important, and it's intrinsic in terms of rurality that you need a car. And if you're a young person, the cost of having a car is astronomical just for insurance without buying it. So the odds are stacked, but I think building appropriate housing for young people in communities where we know young people live should be an agenda for all local authorities, really. Otherwise, we're taking young people from their strength, which is the community and family area and what's around them, which is more likely going to lead to greater cost in terms of making sure that young person is in a really good place going forward year on year on year. So, yeah, I think that would be my take.
So I'd like to ask you now about what do you think are the key drivers, the key causes of youth homelessness that you see in your areas?
Well, first of all, I think there is still a stigma attached to homelessness, and that is, it's absolutely no fault of the young person involved. I've yet to see many cases where it's their faults for becoming homeless. It's the economic situation we're in, where the market has gone out to the roof and it's impossible to afford to pay for accommodation. So the main cause, I think, is poverty and lack of adequate policies from governments. And I think we need to involve the people who are affected much more than we are at the moment, and listen more to the people affected and make sure that they're on the table when conversations or when new policies are being developed, that the people who are being affected should be there, really. It's quite complicated. There's lots of different reasons why people become homeless, but I think mainly it's poverty and lack of opportunities and been let down by the system. Definitely no faults of their own.
So Sian, EYHC research and other research has shown that family breakdown is one of the key causes. Does that still hold true?
Definitely, that's the main reason why young people come to us, is family breakdown. And also, there's a lot of underlying causes as well. Tensions in the house, in the home, but due to a lot of other underlying things such as poverty, might be a young person who is neurodiverse, who is struggling in the family home, or a person who is LGBT, who are maybe not being accepted by their parents or siblings or whatever. Yeah, there's a lot of different reasons, isn't there? But yeah, certainly that's the main. And overcrowding in the house is another common one.
Is that something you see a lot as well, Chris?
Very similar. I think poverty is a broad scope, and as Shana said, the poverty affects so many people. I think it's the pressures on households, which come from all manner of areas, including overcrowding, finance going into a house, the fact that we've got young people maybe sleeping on a mattress in the living room, waiting for people to go to bed before they can get their rest. It all goes back to money, unfortunately, in terms of the type of housing that we can provide. There's been some really good housing development in areas of Powys with some housing associations, which colleagues are working closely with. But that needs to be increased in terms of to meet the need. And yeah, I doubt if any family would honestly want to make a young person homeless. But when there's pressures which come from living on top of each other, arguments, young people needing space to grow and develop, but not having space to grow, which leads to arguments, and then eventually issues get on top of people. And there's a point where the last straw and the camel kind of spring to mind, really. So we've experienced lots of that. I think something that hasn't been mentioned, but is relevant, is drugs and how that can put pressures on a family. Sometimes we'll have issues of county lines where young people are fetching issues home. We've got families which are involved with drugs, and then the young people become involved. So that's a significant issue for many communities and young people. And the county lines agenda, I was always baffled how young people in the north of Powys knew young people in the south of Powys. It was because the county lines networks, and I think as well, hopelessness in terms of young people not aspiring to, not having the hope of getting a house now or being a homeowner or having anywhere. So it's a constant transient issue. So the pressure on families, and we've got families moving because they are homeless as well. And what we need to do is create roots for those families in communities where they belong, where they feel a part of, and where they feel that it's home. So that's, I think that's probably the biggest issue for me, is the pressure on families, which leads then to young people becoming homeless for a whole raft of reasons. And ultimately it comes down to, as Sian said, the poverty issue, the fact that we've got young people and families relying on food banks because they simply cannot make ends meet is a crying shame. I started a project in Carmarthenshire years ago around helping young people get through Christmas because they didn't have any money. So they'd spend, the money would go and they wouldn't have any money for food. And we started putting food out for young people to help them over that period. By the time I left Carmarthenshire in about 2017, we went from 68 hampers in the first year to 460 odd in 2017. And since that, over that period of time and plus, food banks have become a necessity in communities, and that's a really good indicator of how people are struggling when they can't put food on the table to feed themselves and pay all the bills that are required. And of course, inflation and everything going up doesn't help anybody either. So yeah, family pressure for me, Beth, is the biggest thing, which leads to young people being, well, sorry, there's no more room for you here, and then the doors are shown to them.
So, Jess, in your experience and in what you've seen, what do you think are the key drivers and causes of youth homelessness?
Well, in my experience, my personal experience and my experience with people I know who've also been going through this, I think, well, Sian's already mentioned it, but the family breakdown is quite, significant. I suppose the average young person is receiving support from their parents. They're living at home. They're, eating from, their kitchen and getting financial support. But sometimes that doesn't happen for everyone. So there are some young people where that can't happen for them, and for, a multitude of reasons. And that can make, young people, they need to try to find their own way, and before they're really ready to, really, which is a sad situation. But it's good that there is support available for those young people who are being forced kind of to mature before they're fully ready to. So there is support out there. But yeah, it is just a matter of improving on it, really, and doing everything we can to make it better for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked quite a bit about the challenges and the causes of rural homelessness, but I'd like to move on now to start thinking about some of the positive things and some of the possible solutions. So From your experience, Jess, and Sian and Chris, your experience of working with young people experiencing rural homelessness, what do you think works well for those young people? What do those young people need?
Yeah, well, as we've already mentioned, getting around in these kind of areas can be quite difficult. So receiving support to get to and from places, especially places where there are supermarkets, that can be a big help. Being able to get a lift to Tesco's where you can save every little penny, as opposed to having to cash out in local places, and also being able to have a home. That's a big thing. Having a place that you can actually feel safe in and happy. And also with GISDA, we do a lot of activities together in the office. We go out and we do fun things, and I think that helps, with mental health, being able to connect with other people, especially other people that kind of know what you're going through. So that can be a big support as well. So I think we receive quite a well-rounded support here, and a lot of aspects which help in different ways.
Sian, as the GISDA the other GISDA representative, what's been your experience?
Oh, thank you, Jess. You're so lovely. Oh, you're an amazing young person. So thank you for saying nice things about GISDA as well. I think, in GISDA we're really lucky because we've been going 40 years and we've been working with young people over those years to try and develop an approach that works, that works for young people and that secures good outcomes. But, basically it's not rocket science at all. All we need with young people is time and staff who are empathetic and compassionate and who are non-judgmental and who can provide that time and safe space for young people to be themselves. Young people drives the car. We, as staff and an organisation, we sit in the back and we can provide opportunities. We can provide, how about this? How about this option? But at the end of the day, we support the young people in whatever decisions they want to make or whatever direction they want to go with their own lives. It's up to them. But I think, it's time, compassion, being non-judgmental and empathetic is crucial, really, to ensure that we can actually secure good outcomes. Because without all those basics, foundations, there's no point talking about education and career and, all the rest of it. We've got to get the foundations in a good place because some of the young people might not have had somebody listening to them before. So, quite basic, really.
Chris, how about you? What do you think is working well for young people in Powys at the moment?
I think what my team does is play the long game and recognising that short-term intervention seldom works, and particularly time scale on it, because the only time scale that matters is that of the young person. And for one young person, their time to achieve may be very different from another young person. So playing the long game is massively important. Having consistency of staff and support, and hopefully places and buildings also, but having that connection with a member of staff, a team member who will work through them on the journey of hopefully becoming fully independent. Because what youth work, the goal of youth work is to help young people go from being young people to young adults and making informed decisions. And if we can make that happen or help young people on that process, then hopefully with them making informed decisions, then hopefully that decision will be right for them at that time. But they've got to have the right information in order to make the right decision. We've worked with lots of young people and continue to do so with various neurodiverse conditions or presentations. And that's been a massive barrier, and helping those young people to access ADHD assessments, for example, has changed the opportunities totally. And we've gone from a young person being in total chaos to, with support and with support from NHS and various colleagues, their lives have changed around because of helping them to understand their condition and how best to manage themselves, sometimes through medication, sometimes just as you were talking about, Sian, in terms of that psychologically informed approaches and environments, and I think a one-size-fits-all doesn't work, because each local authority is different. Each town or area where people live is different, and the local answers have got to be local answers for that community. There's some lovely work going on around Wales around training provision, training flats for young people, helping them to step up, and I'm sure GISDA does that type of work in terms of helping young people to skill up so they don't need support, they make informed decisions, and they live independent lives. And colleagues in Pembrokeshire have even started, well, it's been going on for a while now, but they're actually a housing provider where they provide sheltered accommodation opportunities. So it's developing in different ways across Wales, but certainly for Powys, having consistency of staff and being able to meet needs when they present it is massive. So that it's no good 2 weeks' time. If it's got to be today, it's got to be today. So we've got to pull the right people together in order to make a difference today, because now is when the need is. So I think that's a key one as well for us. And lastly, the thing that works well is our, what we call keeping in touch with young people. When we work with them, we never just close the door and say, that's it, off you go. We always keep in touch, and that means just dropping them a line every 2 weeks, maybe leading to a month, maybe 2 months, and longer distance in between. But the reason we do that is that if a young person's got an issue with one area of their lives, quite often we'll be able to put an intervention in which supports it. What we don't want is for that young person to return to chaos and to crisis point, because when somebody's at crisis point, they make really bad decisions and everything that can go wrong will go wrong, kind of thing. Whereas if we can sort out a bill, help them in terms of contacting UC or housing benefit or negotiation with a landlord, whatever the need is, by that keeping in touch, that helps young people maintain their tenancies or where they're living, and hopefully gives them that stability to move on and move forward. So number of things there, but consistency of people, long game, and keeping in touch are probably the three takeaways for me that work in Powys.
Beth, do you mind if I just jump in and add a follow-up question? Just because obviously we talked a lot about the specific causes of youth homelessness in regards to rural homelessness, and what in particular about rurality of the situation in these localities means in terms of the challenges. But I just wanted to kind of ask again the question of what's working well, but with a kind of a particular focus on the positives that are specific to working in a rural local authority. So Chris, you were talking when we weren't recording about the ability within Powys to work very seamlessly across departments, and some of the benefits of that offers because of maybe the nature of working in a different, or not different, in a rural local authority compared to maybe one of the more built up city areas. I don't know if Sian, you had any examples of some of the positive aspects of what's working well in regards to working in a more rural local authority than others.
Oh yeah, Gwynedd and Powys is as well, but Gwynedd is a beautiful local authority area, and well-being is so important. So living so near to nature, near to the sea, and surrounded with beautiful mountains is so beneficial to our health and well-being. And we are, as an organisation, try and utilise what we've got and try and take young people out to maximise the natural resource around us. And I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't swap places with somebody living in a massive city. So yeah, we've got our challenges, certainly transport and cost, but yeah, it's the best place in the world to live.
From a Powys perspective, youth works, and quite often we work with the young people we're working with. We actually picked up originally when they were attending the youth club provision. We also got colleagues in school, so we might already have contacts with the family. We might already know the young people from school, so they're not strangers to the service or to us, which is really beneficial. And I think taking your point, Bill, about the wraparound support, because we work so closely with colleagues and we phone up and speak to and problem solve on a day-to-day basis. That works really, really well. Into just this morning, a young person needed safeguarding help, and we pulled a group of people together, and the circumstances of that young person has changed as a result of ourselves, housing officers, police, and safeguarding officers. And that wouldn't have happened in the same way maybe 6-7 years ago, whereas we built to a point where we can rally lots of people together to help the young people who need it and to escalate issues if they need escalating. But in terms of youth work, and what we do, similar to what Sian was saying, is that those experiences of doing things together, getting friends, maintaining friendships, having interests. A lot of young people have access to our local gyms, so we do a lot of work in terms of getting young people to train, to think of physical fitness, to think of activities, doing things together. And hopefully that helps by providing a bit of structure in their lives, things to look forward to. And trips and visits. We use the trains a lot. We do Shrewsbury trips, zoos, beach. Beach is quite often the favourite thing the young people do. And that's something I forgot to mention as well. We work with a lot of young parents. So we work with young people, but they also have little ones themselves. So we do a lot of work around that as well. And we've got some fantastic personal case study stories where a young person has gone from a couple of years ago sleeping in a tent to being absolutely fantastic now, holding a job down with a young family and having a life totally turned around. So we've got some lovely stories. But the key thing is that we play the long game with them, and it's not a short-term intervention, but a long-term investment in each of our young people.
And that's so important, isn't it? I'm going to close now by asking the question that we ask everybody on the podcast. If you woke up tomorrow as First Minister and you've got all this power to change things, what would be the first thing or the most important thing that you would want to implement in order to improve things for young people who are experiencing homelessness in rural areas? And I will start with you, Chris.
For me, it's got to be building the resources for young people to live in safe communities, in houses or accommodation which is designed for them. And if they want to choose to live together, then they have that opportunity, as opposed to only having the opportunity to live independently in a single bedroom flat. So that would be my wish.
Sian?
I think I would change some policies to make it mandatory that local authorities have to work better with third sector organisations, because there's a lot of resources here and we can access funding from outside of Wales even. So, 65% of GISDA's funding come from England, and I don't think local authorities and local governments realise that. And so we're able to bring a lot to the table, but we can't influence decisions with housing and delivery of service. But, we need more power and more influence on local decisions.
And Jessica, finally, what would you be doing if you woke up as First Minister?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, but probably look at possibly trying to improve transportation. It's something that doesn't just public transportation, because it's not just something that affects young people dealing with homelessness. It's something that affects everyone in this area, so I think finding ways to make that easier, more accessible, more affordable, and more regular for people, that would be nice, I think.
ADREF is produced by End Youth Homelessness Cymru and Upod. It's edited by Aled Jones from Upod. The music is July by John Patitucci. If you enjoy our show and want to support us, please leave us a rating. It helps a lot. If you'd like to learn more about EYHC and our work, you can head to our website, endyouthhomelessness.cymru, or search End Youth Homelessness Cymru on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn and X. Diolch am wrando, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.